1935. A single letter. Sent from Tehran to every embassy on earth. No army, no war, no bloodshed, just a letter. And with that letter, one of the oldest names in human civilization disappeared from the world. Map. Persia. Gone. Replaced by a word most people in the West had never heard before. Iran. The official explanation was simple. A name change. A modernization. A diplomatic preference. But that explanation has never told the whole story. Because behind that letter, behind that single quiet diplomatic act, was a decision involving thousands of years of empire. Invasion, religion, identity, and one man's obsession with how the world saw his country. This is not the story of a name change. This is the story of a civilization that refused to disappear, that was buried, invaded, converted, and conquered by every major power in human history, and survived every single one of them. And the name it chose to carry into the modern world tells you exactly how. 4,000 years ago, long before Rome existed, long before Greece had written a single line of philosophy, a group of nomadic people crossed into a plateau surrounded by mountains and desert. They came from the north. They spoke a language that linguists today recognize as the ancestor of Latin, Greek, Portuguese, and Spanish. Their word for mother was mater. Their word for father was pater. Echoes of ma and pater in Latin. Echoes that proved these people were not Arab, were not Semitic, were not what most people today assume Iranians to be. They were Indo-Europeans, distant cousins of the people who would eventually build Rome. Among these migrants, two groups mattered most: the Medes and the Persians. The Medes settled in the northwest, organized, powerful, dominant. They built the first major empire in that part of the world. The Persians settled farther south in a fertile region called Pars. Quiet, unremarkable, overlooked. Nobody was watching the Persians, which was exactly when a man was born there who would make the entire ancient world wish they had been paying attention. His name was Kurosh. The world would come to know him as Cyrus the Great, and what he was about to build had never been seen before in the history of the world. Before Alexander, before Caesar, before Napoleon or Genghis Khan had ever drawn a sword, Cyrus the Great was already rewriting the rules of empire. Here is what made him different from every conqueror who came before him. He did not rule through fear. He ruled through something far more dangerous: respect. When Cyrus defeated the Medes, he did not enslave them. He absorbed them. When he conquered Babylon, he walked in not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. He freed the Jews who had been exiled there for generations. He restored their temples. He sent them home. The Babylonians did not call him an invader. They called him the chosen one of Marduk, their own god. Cyrus did not impose a Persian religion. He became the champion of whatever religion the people he conquered already had. It was not generosity. It was genius. Because the people who believe their own gods support your rule do not rebel. Under Cyrus and his successor Darius I, the Persian Empire expanded from the Indus River in the east to the shores of the Aegean in the west. From Egypt in the south to Central Asia in the north. Egypt, Babylon, Lydia, names that had once dominated the ancient world, now provinces of Persepolis. The empire built roads that connected thousands of miles of territory, a messaging system faster than anything the ancient world had ever seen, a bureaucracy that did not just control, it negotiated, recorded, administered. Historian Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones called it without hesitation the world's first superpower, and it was. For 200 years, Persia was the center of the world. Then a young man from Macedonia crossed the Hellespont and everything changed. He was not yet 30 years old. He had never lost a battle. And on the plains of Gaugamela, on a single October day in 331 BC, Alexander of Macedonia destroyed the largest empire the world had ever seen. The Persian army, vastly larger, fighting on home soil, was broken. Darius III fled, was later murdered by his own men, and the Achaemenid Empire, 200 years of Persian dominance, ended in an afternoon. But here's the part that nobody expects. Alexander did not destroy Persia. He fell in love with it. He wore Persian robes. He married Persian princesses. He participated in Zoroastrian rituals. He preserved the Persian bureaucracy. He ruled from Persian palaces. He declared himself the legitimate successor of the Achaemenid kings. His Greek generals were horrified. They had crossed half the world to humiliate Persia, and their king had become Persian. The tensions inside Alexander's army became dangerous. Conspiracies formed. Generals who had fought beside him for a decade began to question everything. But Alexander had seen something they had not. That ruling an empire this vast required more than swords. It required symbols, legitimacy, the belief of the conquered that the conqueror belonged to them. He wanted to fuse East and West into something the world had never seen before. Then he died. Babylon, 323 BC, 32 years old. No heir, no plan. His empire fractured overnight. But Persia, as an idea, as an identity, as something ancient and stubborn, did not die with him. It simply waited. After Alexander, the region passed through the hands of his generals, then the Parthians. Dynasties came. Dynasties fell. But in the 3rd century AD, from the same region where it had all begun, a new dynasty rose, the Sassanids. They claimed direct descent from the Achaemenids. They restored Zoroastrianism as the state religion. They rebuilt the temples. They revived the traditions. Persia was back. Not as it had been. Empires never return exactly, but recognizably, undeniably Persian. For 400 years, the Sassanid Empire stood, powerful enough to challenge Rome, powerful enough to push back every invader from the east. Then came the force that no empire in the 7th century was prepared for: Islam. In less than 20 years, Arab armies shattered the Sassanid Empire that had stood for 4 centuries. A new religion arrived. A new language arrived. A new political order arrived. Zoroastrianism, which had defined Persian identity for 1,000 years, was gradually displaced. Arabic became the language of religion and administration. And for a moment, it genuinely looked like Persia might finally be erased. It was not, because the Persian soul did something that astonished even its conquerors. It absorbed Islam without surrendering itself. Persian poetry, Persian science, Persian architecture, Persian philosophy. All of it continued, now written in an Arabic script, now shaped by Islamic thought, but distinctly, unmistakably, defiantly Persian. 800 years of invasions, Mongols, Turks, Timur, who built towers from the skulls of his enemies. The Iranian plateau was the most fought-over piece of land on earth. Then in 1501, a dynasty emerged that did something no ruler in the region had attempted before: the Safavids. They did not just want political power. They wanted to make Iran permanently, irreversibly different from every other Muslim nation on earth. They converted the entire country to Shia Islam, forcibly, systematically, through persecution, reform, and social restructuring that reshaped the country from the ground up. It was not a smooth transition. People resisted. Communities were torn apart. Scholars were executed. But when it was done, Iran was different. In a Sunni Muslim world that stretched from Morocco to Indonesia, Iran stood apart, deliberately, permanently. The Safavids did not just create a religious distinction. They created an Iranian identity that no subsequent invasion would ever fully dissolve. And in doing so, they planted the seed of the name that would eventually replace Persia. Because the Safavids did not call their country Persia. They called it Iran, a name derived from Aryanum, the ancient term meaning land of the Aryans, the noble ones. It had always existed, used by Iranians themselves for centuries, but the outside world still called it Persia. That gap between what Iranians called themselves and what the world called them was about to close. In the most deliberate, most calculated, most quietly dramatic way possible. His name was Reza Shah Pahlavi. He had risen from a soldier to the most powerful man in Iran through sheer force of will, deposing the last Qajar king and crowning himself in 1925. His obsession was modernization. He wanted an Iran that looked west, that industrialized, that educated its women, that built railways and universities and a professional army. He looked at Turkey, at Ataturk's radical transformation of the Ottoman Empire into a modern secular republic, and he wanted the same. But there was a problem. To the west, his country was Persia. And Persia, in the Western imagination, was not a modern nation. It was a relic. The word Persia carried 500 years of Western storytelling, of Greek narratives that painted Persia as exotic, decadent, tyrannical, of Orientalist paintings depicting harems and luxury, of colonial condescension dressed as fascination. Reza Shah looked at the word Persia and saw a cage built from other people's stories about who his country was. On March 21, 1935, Nowruz, the Persian New Year, he sent a circular letter to every foreign embassy in Tehran. The message was simple, direct, unambiguous. From this day forward, the official name of this country is Iran. Not Persia, Iran. One letter, one decision, 4,000 years of history repackaged. The reaction was not universally positive. Inside Iran, intellectuals and poets were furious. Persia was not just a name to them. It was Cyrus the Great. It was Darius and Persepolis. It was Rumi and Hafez. It was the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, the greatest epic poem in the Persian language. Abandoning it, even in foreign correspondence, felt like cutting a thread that stretched back 2,500 years. But Reza Shah did not change his mind. Iran it was, and Iran it remained. Here is what most history books miss about this story. The name change of 1935 was not about linguistics. It was about control. Reza Shah understood something that very few leaders in the 20th century understood, that the name a country carries in foreign newspapers and diplomatic cables shapes how that country is treated by the world. Persia, in the Western mind, was beautiful but backward, ancient but irrelevant, romantic but not powerful. Iran knew, unfamiliar, its own word was a blank page. A country that got to write its own story without the weight of 5 centuries of someone else's imagination already on the page. Whether it worked is another question entirely, because 44 years later, in 1979, everything changed again. Ayatollah Khomeini's revolution overthrew the monarchy. The Islamic Republic of Iran was born. Relations with the West collapsed. Sanctions followed. Decades of geopolitical tension followed. And Iran, the clean blank page Reza Shah had hoped for, filled with imagery that bore no resemblance to his vision. Today, Iran evokes nuclear tensions, sanctions, conflict, revolution, while Persia, the name he discarded, has been quietly reclaimed by the culture industry. Persian restaurants, Persian rugs, Persian poetry, Persian cats. The word Persia, stripped of its political weight, now carries only the romance, the ancient glory, the poetry of Rumi, the grandeur of Persepolis. 2 names, 1 land. 2 completely different stories the world tells about the same place. And in that gap between what a country calls itself and what the world decides to remember is the oldest struggle in the history of civilization. The struggle to control your own story. Persia was not erased in 1935. It was hidden behind a new name chosen by a king who believed he could rewrite how the world saw his people with a single diplomatic letter. He could not. No one ever can. Because a civilization 4,000 years old that survived Alexander, the Mongols, the Arabs, Tamerlane, and every empire that ever tried to absorb it, does not disappear because of a name. It waits, as it has always waited, patient, ancient, unchanged beneath the surface. Iran and Persia are not two different countries. They are two different answers to the same question every civilization eventually faces. Who gets to decide what you are called and what that name is allowed to mean? Subscribe to Historva, because the most important battles in history were never fought with weapons. They were fought with words.